All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going straight to the source to deconstruct something pretty incredible: the U.S. Navy's collective brain, the massive, complex system that keeps a global force operating as one.
I mean, just stop and think about the sheer scale of that for a second. You've got the US Navy spread out across every ocean on the planet, with this unbelievable mix of technology and people. A single miscommunication, just one little mismatch in procedure, could be absolutely disastrous. So, how do you make sure that a planner sitting in an office in Norfolk, Virginia, and a technician on a submarine deep in the Pacific are working from the exact same playbook?
Well, the answer is a concept called Navy Doctrine. And no, this isn't just some dusty old rulebook sitting on a shelf. As the source material puts it so well, it's the expression of institutional wisdom. It's basically decades and decades of hard-won experience, all distilled into a shared language and a common framework. It's what ensures everyone, and I mean everyone, understands the mission and exactly what their role is.
So, to really get our heads around this, here's our game plan. We're going to start with this idea of a collective brain. Then we'll peek inside its library. We'll look at its pyramid structure, crack the code of its language, see how it actually evolves, and finally, really get why it's the ultimate blueprint for action. Okay, first up, this idea of a collective brain, let's unpack what that really means. You should think of it less as a strict set of rules and more like a shared consciousness.
It really is like the Navy's shared operating system. Look, in a chaotic, fast-moving situation, you're not always going to have a perfect checklist for every single thing you need to do. And that's exactly where Doctrine kicks in. It provides that foundational guidance, those core principles that let you make smart, decisive calls under immense pressure. It's the default you fall back on when things get unpredictable.
And this whole collective brain, this massive operating system, it has a home. It's not a physical place, but a vast and meticulously organized digital library. You see, to stop confusion in its tracks, to prevent different people from working with different versions of the truth, the Navy created the Navy Warfare Library, or NWL. And this is key. It is the single source of truth for all doctrine. If a document isn't in the NWL, it's not official, period. That single step guarantees consistency across the entire force.
But the NWL isn't just a giant data dump. For it to actually work, it's built on these 6 key principles. It has to be authoritative, so you know you can trust it. It has to be comprehensive, covering pretty much everything. And, maybe most importantly, it's got to be accessible, current, relevant, and usable. Because what good is all that knowledge if you can't find it and apply it in the real world, like right now? So, okay, you've got this massive, trustworthy library. But how on earth do you organize it so it actually makes sense? You can't just throw all the books on the floor, right? The Navy uses this brilliant 3-tiered structure. Just picture a pyramid. At the very top, you have the big, broad, foundational ideas. And as you move down the pyramid, the guidance gets more and more specific, all the way down to individual actions. Let's take a look at each of these layers. Right at the peak of the pyramid, you have what's called capstone doctrine. This is the 10,000-foot view, the big picture stuff. We're talking about the foundational principles that guide the entire naval service. The key document up here is NDP-1, Naval Warfare, and it lays out the core beliefs that shape absolutely everything else. The middle layer is the keystone doctrine. Now, this is still pretty high level, but it starts getting a little more specific. This is what guides how the Navy organizes itself and uses its forces in broad areas. Think intelligence or logistics, all working within the framework set by that capstone layer above it. And finally, at the wide base of the pyramid, we hit fleet doctrine. This is where the rubber meets the road. This layer is packed with the nitty-gritty details, the specific tactics, techniques, and procedures, what they call TTPs, for individual weapons, systems, and missions. This is the how-to manual for the sailor on the deck. Now, for one of my favorite parts of this whole thing. If you've ever seen one of these publication numbers, you might just think it's a random jumble of letters and numbers. But it's not. It's a code. And it's a really smart one. So you see a publication number like NTT P3-20.6, and your eyes might just glaze over, right? It looks like total alphabet soup. But what if I told you that code tells you almost everything you need to know about what's inside that document before you even open it? Let's crack it open. Okay, here's the breakdown. The letters, NTTP, tell you the type of document.
That's our tactics, techniques, and procedures from that fleet doctrine layer we just talked about. The first number, 3, tells you the series, in this case, operations. The next number, 20, is the functional field, that's surface warfare. And the final number, 6, is the subfunction. So bam, without even looking inside, we know it's a tactical guide for surface warfare operations. It's an absolutely brilliant organizational system. And that very first number, the series, is basically the key that unlocks the entire library. The source material has a full table, but just look at a few examples. Series 2 is always intelligence. Series 3 is always operations. 4 is always logistics. Everything is logically sorted so you can find exactly what you need fast. It's like a Dewey Decimal System for warfighting. So you might be thinking, okay, this is a great system, but what happens when technology changes or a new threat pops up? Does this huge library just become obsolete? The answer is a hard no. And this is absolutely vital to understand. The Navy Warfare Library is a living system. These aren't rules carved in stone. The whole thing is designed to constantly adapt and evolve based on direct feedback from the fleet, on new technology as it comes online, and on the hard lessons learned from real-world operations. And that evolution isn't random. It follows a very formal, collaborative process. A great new idea or a critical lesson learned doesn't just get thrown in there. It has to go through a rigorous development cycle, from an official proposal to drafting and review by a whole bunch of subject matter experts to a final approval, and only then is it officially published into the library. The system is also incredibly flexible, and it can handle changes at different speeds. For example, a simple typo or some kind of administrative error can be fixed with what's called a routine change. But, and this is so important, if a critical vulnerability is discovered, something that could lead to injury or equipment damage, an urgent change can be pushed out immediately to the entire fleet. This makes sure the doctrine stays not just current, but safe and effective. So let's bring this all home. We've got a collective brain housed in this amazing library with a logical code that makes sense of it all and a built-in process for evolution. What does all that add up to in the real world? You know, this quote from the source material just says it all perfectly. At the end of the day, this whole massive, complex system exists for one simple reason: to guide action. It is the blueprint that allows hundreds of thousands of individual people to act as a single, coordinated force to get the job done. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. While the Navy's solution is obviously on a massive scale, the problem it solves is universal. Every organization, whether it's a tiny startup or a global corporation, has its own institutional wisdom. So the real question is, how do you capture it, how do you organize it, and how do you make sure it's actually guiding your team to success? Thanks for digging into this with me.